what is the Renaissance? The word Renaissance means rebirth, to be born again. And that's exactly what it was. This is the bridge between the Middle Ages, which was called the Dark Ages, and modern times today. And it started as a cultural movement in Italy, especially in Florence, Italy, a city right a couple hours away from Rome, in the late medieval period. And then it spread all throughout the rest of Europe and the whole Holy Roman Empire. The thing to remember about the Renaissance is just what I was just talking about, that the people, the writers, the artists, the scholars, the people who taught things, they're all looking back at ancient Greece and ancient Rome and how awesome it was. And they're looking back and they're trying to reinvent it and recreate it and bring back that golden period of Roman history. So you're going to recognize a lot of things when we learn about them today that you saw back when we studied the Roman Empire and ancient Rome. They called this the coming out of the dark time, coming out of the dark ages of all of that plague and swampiness. Back in the medieval times, the Foro Romano was just a big swamp. It just went into ruin. So this Renaissance, it was possibly one of the greatest periods the world has ever known of beautiful literature, philosophy, art, music, politics, science, religion. And what they were trying to do in all of these different things were to show things as they were real, to paint real looking human beings and to show human emotions in art. And a lot of the themes are Christian. Even though they were logical and they were trying to go back to ancient Roman times, they still used a lot of Christian themes. So you'll see a lot of Jesus and Mary and saints and martyrs and all of those things that we've been seeing since yesterday. And this is the beginning of what would later lead to the Protestant Reformation. So for those of you who are not Catholic, but you're Christian, we'll learn about that on Monday, how that happened. Here are some of the things that led to the Renaissance, and we're going to learn about them in more detail. The Italian city-state, which is what replaced feudalism that we learned about yesterday with the lords and the manors and the castles and churches. Politics, money, the Black Death. Who knows what the Black Death was? We talked about it yesterday. Yes, Dylan.
What's that? A virus that killed lots and lots of people.
Exactly. You're both right. The plague, a virus that killed lots and lots of people. So they're still having problems with the plague in the Renaissance. In fact, huge problems. Humanism, which we're going to learn about, and Classicism, which we're going to learn about. So here is the map. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail of how this happened, but you can see the Roman Empire is now broken up into a lot of different parts. It's become the Holy Roman Empire, so it's become Christian. And then Italy itself is broken up into a lot of smaller pieces called city-states, which we're going to talk about in a minute. We learned all about this yesterday. So yesterday, remember, we learned about feudalism, where people moved from the cities because of the plague into the towns. And they were ruled by rich families with usually what was called a lord ruling that whole area and taking care of all of the people. And they farmed the land. Well, now those are becoming actual, what are called city-states. They're becoming territories or groups of places that are ruled by very wealthy, very influential families. And here's how Italy was broken up. So there's Rome. It's in the Papal city-state, so it's controlled by the Pope. And then here's the Holy Roman Empire. There's the Kingdom of Italy, the northern part of Italy with Florence. And then south, you have Sicily and the Kingdom of Sicily. And to summarize a whole, like hundreds and hundreds of years of history into just a couple of sentences, you remember St. Peter in early Christianity, one of the apostles of Jesus? So St. Peter was considered to be the very first bishop of the Catholic Church, the Christian Church. And then everyone after him, they appointed a new leader called the Pope that was supposed to be descended directly from St. Peter. And the Pope was kind of the new version of an emperor, except an emperor of the church, but also had a lot of say over what happened in the government too. So all of these Italian city-states are constantly fighting back and forth, because there's also an emperor and a pope, over whether or not the Pope should be the most important person or the emperor should be the most important person. And as we'll learn on Monday, that fight just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until we get Protestantism. So feudalism is gone. It's replaced by city-states. And the whole society, remember we learned about the Silk Road yesterday, the whole society has been taken over by making money through trade and commerce. So merchants, people who traded goods across the different ports and across the Silk Road, those become the most important people because they have the most money. And they're starting again to not like the monarchy, the kings and queens and that kind of thing. People are starting to want more freedom and expression. And that's actually where a lot of the art comes from the Renaissance. So if you look at where Rome is on the map and you look at where Venice is, you see Venice here up at the top in the little purple spot. So Florence and Venice in particular become centers of trade and very, very wealthy, lots and lots of money in Florence and Venice. And a lot of the art that we see from the Renaissance is going to come out of Florence and Venice because of this. Venice was the closest place in Italy to the east, to Asia, and that Silk Road. And so that was the first place that really cool things would show up, like gold and silk and all sorts of valuable things. And then it would get distributed all into what is now Italy. Before, at this time, it was not known as Italy. It was just all of these different city-states. And all of this money, all of this trade allowed people to pay for lots of art and music and other things, which is how we got the Renaissance and all of this beautiful art that we're going to see. But, dun, 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 the plague is back. And Italy gets completely blasted by the plague. Italy gets carried, the plague gets carried by those fleas from all of the boats coming, because of course trade is the most important thing ever in this culture. And it takes out 1/4 of the entire population of all of Europe. So let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us. It probably would have taken 2 of us if we had lived back in the times of the Black Death. In Florence, it took 50% of people. It killed them. So Florence's population in 1347, half of them died from the plague. And here are some of the consequences. This actually was a little medieval painting of the plague. You can see all of these skeletons dancing together. People became really familiar with the idea of death because it was all around them. And you'll see a lot of this in the art of the Renaissance too. So people start thinking a lot more about their life on earth instead of just their life in heaven. And it also caused people to be a lot more religious because, of course, they were trying to deal with all of this suffering around them. For normal people, it was also a good thing because they got a lot of land once other people died. There was a lot of land available. And the people who survived, food became cheaper. There was a lot more land to grow things. They inherited a lot of property. So people became wealthier after the plague. And now we're getting into the Renaissance. So here's the beginning of the Renaissance. This guy with the giant nose, his name was Dante. Has anyone heard of Dante before? I used to have a dog named Dante. And the dog was just just like this book, actually. Dante was the father, Dante Alighieri, was the father of the Italian language. Italian as we speak it today. Before Dante, most people spoke, or at least wrote books in something else. What language did they write in before Dante? Does anyone remember?
Latin?
You got it, Stephen. Latin. Bingo. So prior to Dante, they wrote in Latin, but Dante decided he was going to write this really gruesome and terrifying book called the Inferno, which means hell. And he was going to write the whole thing in a dialect, which is in Italy, even today, every different part of Italy speaks a little bit different version of the language. And Dante wrote it in the Florence dialect of the language, which later became the Italian language. So any of you, if any of you have studied Italian, you can thank Dante because he's the one that first wrote it and used it for literature. And he wrote the Divine Comedy, which is all about people's struggles with hell and the devil and all sorts of wild stuff. It's a very good, interesting book. And one of his quotes is, "There's a gate to hell in the book," and he writes, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." It's a very spooky book. So he is the one that's in charge. He's credited with actually having invented Italian. And this was in Florence. And there he is. Humanism. Has anyone ever heard of humanism? Probably not yet. So humanism sounds complicated, but all humanism was a movement where people wanted to paint art or write books that focused on what's actually real and that looked at what is a human? How do we work? How do we function? And humanism also said it was okay for people to want to be rich or to be comfortable or to be beautiful. So we go from the Middle Ages where things are kind of struggling to humanism, where now there's a focus on the beautiful, on wealth, on gold, on art, on gorgeous, elaborate music. Huge change. And what the humanists did to do this is they looked back to the best part of Roman history, the part of Roman history where Rome was succeeding, where Rome was doing great things. So what time period do you think they would have looked back on if they wanted an example of Rome actually succeeding?
Like the first part?
Yeah, the first part. Someone else said something too. Nathan, what did you just say? So you're absolutely right. The first part, classical Rome, the part of Rome where they're building beautiful cities and they're taking over the world and they have philosophy and art and all of these great things. So humanism was just looking back at all of those things and trying to bring them back in a new way in Rome and Florence and Venice and across Europe. And they thought people should be educated in all sorts of different things, in poetry and grammar and history and philosophy, rhetoric. They thought they should bring back all of those things instead of just studying religion. And they start writing in vernacular Italian, so just the Italian that normal people speak instead of Latin, which made it possible for people who hadn't studied Latin in school, who weren't rich, to read books and to be able to read the language that was being written in. So they made culture accessible to not just the rich people, but to everyone, which was a magical thing to do. The purpose behind humanism was to become a well-rounded person, a person who's good at a lot of different things, just like the Romans and the Greeks believed that you should study sports and you should study philosophy and music and all these different things. They brought that back to Rome and to Florence. They called it the uomo universale, the universal man. And today we call that same type of person a Renaissance man or a Renaissance woman. So if you hear someone called a Renaissance man, that just means someone who's good at lots and lots of different things. You got it, music and art, bingo. So in the Renaissance, the idea was to be good at all of these kinds of things, not just specifically in one or another, like sometimes we focus on now. So if you were a Renaissance kid back in this time, you would be studying all of those different things. And this is part of where we get the subjects that we have for school, is there's still some emphasis on this. Oops, sorry, I unshared the screen. There you go. So there's your list here, and this is a great list. This is exactly the things that they focused on. So this is Florence. This is the Duomo in Florence. This is a Renaissance architecture, a big, beautiful, one of the most magnificent churches on the planet. So in the Renaissance, culture was very, 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 very important, especially in Florence, which was the center of the Renaissance. Florence loved its parties and its culture and its arts and its music. Because it was a city that was based around business and trading and not religion, things like dance, music, literature, partying were much more important to the Florentines because they had a lot of money. And a lot of this was sponsored by one of the richest families ever to live in Italy. And if you ever go to Italy, you'll see their mark everywhere, the Medici. They were also one of the most dramatic and crazy families to have ever existed in Italy. The Medici made all of their money trading wool and textiles during all of this trading, right, with the Silk Road. And they used all that money to sponsor the arts. And that's why we have all of these magnificent pieces of art that we have today, is because the Medici paid for it. They encouraged the spread of the arts all over Italy and the world. And so you can find their influence. When you're a tourist in Italy, you find the Medici everywhere, all the cool things that they built and they paid for. So after the Black Death, Florence became a center for cultural development. And this just got better and better and better into the Renaissance. They were the leaders in literature, music, philosophy, science. And because of all of this humanism and money everywhere, having fun became really, really important. Italy became a leader in having fun, which really is something across the history of Rome that never was really lacking. They have always been good at having fun and causing trouble, and this is no exception, this period of time. Anyone know what this is? This Roman monument? You've probably seen the outside of it. I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of it. Any guesses?
Classicism?
Well, it's definitely a classical monument. But anyone know which one it is? This is from Roman times, ancient Rome.
I don't know. The Forum?
Let me show you the outside of it and see if you know it.
Okay, show me the outside.
Let's see if you guys know what the outside looks like. I'm going to try to hide the words so that because I bet you've at least seen a picture of this. You might not know what it's called. Okay, here you go. This is what the outside looks like.
Oh, it's the the Papillon?
Almost, it's not the Papillon, but very close. It's the Pantheon.
Oh, I can't.
Super close. You were 100% right. That is what it is. This is the Pantheon. And this is
I just couldn't say it correctly.
Heather, you were very close. You had it right for sure. And you can still go into this. One of the reasons that this survived, and it still looks just like this, is because they turned it into a church. They turned it from an ancient Roman monument, it used to be a temple, ancient Roman temple, into a church. And so still to this day, if you go to Rome, you walk into this and it looks just like this. And one of the cool things is if you go on a rainy day, then the rain comes through that hole at the top and it pours all the way straight down onto the floor of the inside of the Pantheon. And it's really cool to watch. A big loud sound as the rain falls down. But this is just an example. So they went back and they tried to restore or recreate all of these beautiful monuments of classicism. And a lot of Renaissance architecture is influenced by the Roman arch and a lot of the Roman architecture. In fact, so influenced that a lot of time they stole the pillars from the Roman and then used those pillars to build the churches that they built in the Renaissance. So sometimes they even just took pieces of the Roman architecture buildings and plunked them into their new churches. And the thing to remember about the Renaissance is they're trying to move towards depicting the human body in ways that look more real. Which, if you remember, when we looked at the art of the Middle Ages, it doesn't look so real. So this is the, there's kind of a period of time between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance where there were artists, and this was called the Proto-Renaissance. And there's debate and argument over whether or not this is when the Renaissance begins or it's not really when it begins. But what you can see here is even in this painting, the characters are starting to look a little more real and a little less flat and like they're 2D. Do you guys know the difference between 2D and 3D?
Yeah.
2D looks flat on a page and 3D looks like it's got shape to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're trying to go from 2D to 3D in their art, which never had been done. So it's not easy. And it takes time. So you start to see that, like, for example, this mummy has a little bit of a 3D thing going on. There's use of light and shade to make it look more 3D.
Why are his eyes open?
His eyes are open because this is a painting of Jesus. There's Jesus with the halo raising Lazarus from the dead. It's a biblical scene. And so he takes dead Lazarus, there's Lazarus' mother begging him to help, and brings him back from death. And so his eyes are open because they'd already wrapped him up in burial shrouds, assuming that he was dead, which he was. And then Jesus does a miracle and makes him come back to life. So that's why his eyes are open. This is a very popular theme of art. So they're looking back at all of those Greek and Roman classics, and they're trying to make their own new religious art. This is another one of Duccio's paintings. This is the Virgin and Child enthroned with saints. And you can see it's starting to look less flat. He's shaded the faces. There's a little bit of layers. But the real sort of tradition started with Giotto. Giotto di Bondone was a painter and architect in Florence, and he's considered number one in the line of great artists who contributed to the Renaissance. He tried to draw his paintings and his characters according to nature and according to how human beings actually look. So if you look at this painting, you can see that the saint here, he's got ribs, you can see his body, and he's made everybody seem much more realistic. This is St. Francis of Assisi, Legend of St. Francis of Assisi. And he started to try to make the characters look much more realistic. Although you can see they're not quite there yet. You look at those little children on the left and they look like kind of mini adults with tiny heads. So this is where they're just starting to study the way that the body is shaped and anatomy and starting to get a sense of what the body really does look like. They knew all of these things back in ancient Rome already, but this wisdom and this art got lost during the Middle Ages. Here's another example of Giotto. This is the Madonna enthroned. A lot of the paintings are depicting Mary, the mother of Jesus, and baby Jesus. That was probably their most favorite topic to paint about, was the Madonna, the Mary. And you can see it's starting to look more like a real human being and starting to look a lot less flat. Starting to become 3D. And you can see this by the folds in Mary's dress and the folds in the angels' dresses. There's folds in her shirt and in Jesus's clothes. And they're trying to look at how clothing is falling, how faces and bodies move, and figure out how to actually paint it. And here, the bodies are taking up a lot more room in the picture. Here's just for comparison, this is a medieval painting of a really bad painting of horses. What do you notice about the way the horses are painted in this painting?
They look like they're 2D and flat.
Exactly.
So ovally.
Exactly. You see how flat they look, and you see how, see how they don't really understand what a horse actually looks like when they draw it. Like, they don't really understand how a horse moves or where the horse's muscles are or anything. And so these horses look kind of like sad, pregnant, fat cartoons.
Yeah, that horse does look like he's fat.
I don't know. Like, I look at the legs on this horse on the right. No horse has ever stood that way. They don't have scrawny little stick legs that jut out from their sides like that. So you can see, like, they didn't quite understand how to paint living things. Here's a painting that's actually of the saint that I studied in my graduate degree. This is Santa Francesca Romana. She is the patron saint of Rome. She's also the patron saint of drivers. And so every year during her feast, so the cool thing about this saint is that she was really well loved by the Romans. So she lived in the Middle Ages and did her miracles in the Middle Ages. And then she had a convent of nuns that lived with her. And then when she died, they put her body in a tomb in the bottom of one of the churches, right in the Foro Romano, actually, a church that had used to be a Roman temple. We learned on the very first day how those temples just get layered and layered and layered. So this was one of those. And they, over time, the monks and the nuns kept changing her clothes as Roman style changed. So her character, her story, her clothes were different in the Renaissance. Then they were different again in the Baroque. And in the modern day, her story is that she protects and blesses people who drive cars and motorcycles. So every year, once a year, all the Romans drive by her church and they honk their horns, and they honk the horns of their little Vespas, their little motorcycle scooters. And then a priest comes out from this church and they bless all of the cars and all of the Vespas. And the Romans think this helps keep them safe. So the neat thing about all of these characters in Roman history is their stories change over time as the history of Rome changes over time. But this is a medieval picture of one of her miracles of creating grain for the poor, the hungry, and feeding the hungry. And you can see how flat her character is. It's actually improving. Like, it's still an improvement from this, which was done a lot earlier than this painting. And you can see you're starting to see some folds. The painter in Rome who did this is actually a very, very famous painter. And so Giotto, who's in Florence, and is also, like, he's the first great artist in Florence. These guys are painting it around the same time. He's the first artist to show 3D figures in Western art. And to not flatten the painting. So see how you can see how it looks like the folds of this angel's cloak actually have shape to them and they're not flat against the page. So he's starting to use light and dark colors of paint and shading and different things to actually show depth and dimension so that it's just not a flat character on a page. Like, if you were to draw a stick figure, that would be 2D. But he's starting to show that actually these characters have shape to them. And that becomes one of the most important parts of being able to tell if it's Renaissance art. And remember that, because it's going to be on your homework. Your homework is going to be, I gave you a bunch of slides of different classical, medieval, and Renaissance paintings. And without Googling it, I want you to see if you can figure out which are which just by looking at how it's painting. So remember, 3D images, Renaissance. And you can see the characters become much bigger too. They take up the whole space of the painting instead of just being a part of a big, larger painting. Here's another example of Giotto's works. You can see also there's using lots of beautiful colors and lots of detail in the faces that you don't see in the Middle Ages. Then we get into Lorenzetti and Lorenzetti's frescoes. And Lorenzetti, the contribution that he was to Italian art in the Renaissance was perspective. Does anyone know what the word perspective means? Yes, Katie. Some of you who are artists or like to draw might know this.
Perspective is a thing that that you can people see different things from different spots.
Exactly. So you see how in this painting here, on the bottom left, there's a character who's bigger. And so your mind thinks that he's closer to you. And then if you look way up high in the top right, with this white spot where things are falling down, you can see these tiny little characters back here, and they look much farther away. So that didn't exist before the Renaissance. People weren't using that, this way of showing distance and space. Here's a better example. You can see that there's some people in the front of this painting who are bigger, and then if you look towards the background of the painting, there's little tiny donkeys and little tiny people, and you know by the way it's painted that it's further away. And you know by the way these buildings are painted that they're not all in a row. Like I'm not very good at painting, and so when I paint mountains, it looks like the mountains are just one mountain, two mountain, three mountain. But because of perspective, you could see that some of these buildings are more far away than others. There's another example. But see, they still haven't quite mastered it yet. Like this little guy here, he's a little bit small to be in that spot in the painting. So now we're getting into the early Renaissance. This is when they start to build awesome churches. And this is when they start to bring back all of that awesome Roman architecture that we saw a long time ago, but haven't seen since. That was known for the beautiful bronze doors that he made as a goldsmith and a sculptor. And these doors are one of the treasures of Italy. They're a masterpiece. You can see how detailed, and these doors, they look small in this picture, but these doors are like enormous, huge, huge, huge. A lot of those other famous artists like Donatello trained in his workshop and learned how to do art from this person. And you can see he carved all of these beautiful images into the bronze. And here's an example of the church. This is the Duomo. This is the church, the main church in the middle of Florence in Italy. And this was built by Brunelleschi, which was one of the most famous architects ever to have lived. And you can see now, instead of those spires, we have a giant dome. And this is based on the architecture of the Romans, who made those arches, which could hold a whole bunch of weight. So they took the physics of the Romans, and they used it to build these awesome, awesome churches. And you can see how big it is, because see at the top, those are all people standing at the top of the dome. And from there, you can see the whole city of Florence. But that's how big it is those people look like tiny little pigeons because it's so big. So this dome was built in 1419, and it took most of Brunelleschi's life to build this. No dome this big had ever been built since antiquity. Remember the Pantheon? It's also got that massive dome. The dome is a contribution of the Romans. And it contains 4 million bricks. 4 million that they had to make. Yeah, we don't have to talk about all the details of the architecture, but this is what it looks like inside. You can see this is how they built the inside of the dome. Brunelleschi, the way that he studied art was he would look at the outlines of all of the different famous architecture in in Florence, and he would paint them using a mirror. And he noticed that all of the lines converged on the horizon line. Horizon line is where the sky meets the ground. And he started to use that geometry in his art. And any of you who have ever taken an art class will have to learn this eventually. The lines, all of the lines converge at a vanishing point, a point at which the setting behind you disappears. And so all of the paintings after this are structured this way, where there's a point where the background vanishes, and then everything else is painted in perspective to that point. So objects that are closer are going to be painted bigger, and objects that are smaller are going to be painted, or that are farther away are going to be painted smaller. And this gives the perception of standing in a grand, giant palace instead of a flat 2D space. And this is where the Renaissance just takes off, is having this ability to do this. So you can see, here's another example. This is Pietro Perugino. This is in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican City. And you can see all of the characters and everything are painted with this vanishing point, the red dot being the central spot in the distance that everybody vanishes into. And that gives you the sense that they're in a giant space. That's another example of a Renaissance church back there, by the way. You can see the dome. How are we doing on time? Okay, great. The Medici, the notorious family of the Renaissance. This is Giovanni de' Medici, and he brought the family from a small banking family. They started off as bankers and lending money to becoming the most important family in Florence and one of the most important families in all of Italy. They had popes that were part of their family. They had royals. They were super, super important and very popular among the people as well. So they gained lots and lots of power, and they spent lots of money making Florence very, very beautiful. They were patrons of art.
God.
Patrons mean people.
Oh.
So they were patrons of the art, and so they paid for all of these beautiful paintings to be painted. Now we're starting to get into, this is Donatello. Probably you guys have heard of him, maybe as a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, maybe not. He was a sculptor from Florence, and he studied classical sculpture from ancient Rome, and he was known for carving in the round. So he, instead of carving things into flat places, he would carve all the way around the sculpture and make them look really lifelike and real. So you can see, and of course I put the leaf there because you're kids, but you can see all of the different anatomy of this body, all of the muscles, and it looks like a real human being. This is the David. And if you've ever heard of the David that's in Florence, the giant David, which we'll see either today or tomorrow, this was an earlier version of the David. This was the first known freestanding nude statue produced since ancient Rome. And of course, the theme of the Renaissance, it's virtue triumphing over brutality and irrationality. They thought the Middle Ages was brutal. Here's another artist, Masaccio. These are pronounced as ch in Italian. And he is also one of the first people to use a vanishing point. So you can see more, you can see that this is earlier than some of the other works that we've seen. And there's a vanishing point in this painting as well. And this is Bellini. Bellini is one of my favorite artists. Bellini was born in Venice, and Bellini used really beautiful romantic colors of like the sunrise. And he is known for his colors. See all of these beautiful little putti, little angels without bodies in the background, all the different colors. And all the rich colors of her clothes. These paints were really expensive back in the Renaissance, which is why you needed a patron. Especially, you see this color blue that's on Mary's cloak? This is lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli was made from the crushing of a bright blue rock, and it's the most expensive paint. And even today, if you're a painter, if you've ever used this paint, you know that it costs a fortune because this rock is very rare and expensive. And so some of the greatest painters use this really beautiful lapis lazuli color to pop out their paintings. You'll see this color a lot in the Renaissance. And the other cool thing that this artist did, see how you notice, what do you notice about this that's very different than the Middle Ages? What are some of the things you can see in this painting that look really different? Yes, Katie.
They look much more 3D.
Much more 3D. What do you notice about the use of light and dark in this painting? What can you see about light and dark in this picture? How are they using light? Anyone notice anything about the way the light hits the characters?
Yeah.
Yes, Katie.
Like the light is coming from the left, and then like the left parts of their faces are more lighter.
Exactly. You can see there's a light source that's coming from the left, and it's shining on their faces from basically where we're standing if we're looking at the painting. And then the background is very dark, and it lights up their faces in a very beautiful way. This, when we get to Monday and we talk about chiaroscuro and Caravaggio and all of my favorite Baroque artists, this is going to be really important. This is something no one was doing before. Last one, Botticelli, and then we'll pick up with this on Monday. Botticelli was another artist that was doing really beautiful, cool things with color. You've probably seen some of Botticelli's paintings. This is Primavera, which means spring. And you can see, what do you notice about what this picture is about? Does any of this look familiar to you?
Yeah, I see Venus.
Exactly. So they're not only just basing their art on the Romans, they're also going back to Roman paganism and Roman pagan themes in what they're painting. You know, this one isn't about the Catholic Church. This is ancient Roman history. And a lot of time they weave it together, like you've got an angel up here. So Botticelli especially was really interested in the study of antiquity and the study of ancient Rome. And he liked to mix the idea of antiquity and of medieval Christianity all together and blend it all into one painting, which is kind of cool and funny. And you see, look at how the cloth is draped on these women, and you can see it flowing and moving and blowing in the wind. So the artists are getting more and more creative and brave in how they're draping clothes, how they're depicting women. And they're almost in like ancient Roman togas, except that they're see-through. You can see all of these beautiful details. You see how real this hand looks? See how this is the birth of Venus. And this, you can see Venus being born out of the seashell. And one of the cool things about this is that Botticelli used a special type of rock, alabaster powder, which was super expensive. And you see how the painting has this kind of like sunrisey, light, glimmering quality to it. It's because of the alabaster that he mixed with the paints. The Medici paid for this, by the way. So you can see the ideas of emotions and love and spiritual beauty and all of these characters having muscles and looking like real human beings. And in fact, they started studying anatomy, the study of the human body, at the same time as all of this. So when we get to Da Vinci tomorrow on Monday, you're going to see even more realism of the human body. Renaissance. We could spend all 10 days doing the Renaissance. It's magnificent. So we're going to get into Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael and Michelangelo, all of those guys on Monday.